How do we know humans originate in Africa? This is the article by the Tech Interactive, published January 25th, 2023. So it's not that old of an article. It's pretty recent. Now let's jump right into this because I find stuff like this to be interesting. John from Toronto asks, how do we know Africa is the cradle of modern humanity? Is it due to DNA research? All right, let's jump into it. Our human species, known as Homo sapiens, most likely evolved between 150,000 and 200,000 years ago. Humans are found on every continent in the world, but the reason we think our ancestors came from Africa is because of both fossil and DNA evidence. We've looked for fossils from our ancient human ancestors all over the world. Of all of these, the oldest fossils we've discovered were found in Africa. If we look at fossils of ancient Homo sapiens that we found in Europe and Asia, they're not nearly as old. Fossil evidence is incomplete though. Unfortunately, we just don't have that many ancient fossils. That's why each discovery is so exciting. Luckily, we also have DNA to verify what we've learned from fossils. Both types of evidence point to Africa as the place where Homo sapiens first originated, fossilized in time. When Charles Darwin was working on his theory of evolution, he began to wonder about where the first humans came from. He guessed that our species might have evolved in Africa, but back in the 1800s while Darwin was alive, there was very few skeletons of ancient humans that had been discovered. There just wasn't much evidence to go off of. Nearly a century later, archaeologists uncovered fossilized parts of human skeletons in Omo Kabish, Ethiopia. Forgive me if I mispronounced that. Because the remains were so deep in the ground, they figured what they found was old, but they had no idea how old until they took them back to the lab. By using special types of elements in the soil, they learned that the fossils were the oldest ever found, around 195,000 years old. Archaeologists have also been hunting for skeletons on other continents. In the Middle East, ancient Homo sapiens skeletons have been found dating back to 92,000 years old. In Australia, the oldest ancient skeletons are 40,000 to 60,000 years old, and those in Europe are only 30 to 40,000 years old. Compared to the ancient skeletons found in Africa, the earliest human remains outside of Africa are really young, and they get younger the farther away from Africa that you get. These patterns seem to suggest that Homo sapiens first originated in Africa and then eventually spread out to occupy continents further and further away. However, we can't be entirely sure based on just fossils alone since ancient skeletons in good condition are hard to come by. Maybe we just haven't found older skeletons of people in places outside of Africa because the conditions weren't right for them to be preserved. Maybe it's just really hard to find ancient fossils. Could it be that they exist but it just haven't been found yet? But this doesn't seem likely. Scientists don't have any problem finding human fossils that are older than the ones found in Africa, but none of these older fossils belong to our species of human. We've found fossils and artifacts dating older than 200,000 years in Europe and Asia, but they belong to our closest relatives, the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. The skeletons of these other human species look very similar to us, but they are different enough to tell apart. Archaeologists can use features of skeletons like skull shape and size to distinguish whether they are our ancestors or more distant cousins. So as you can see, this is still the most widely accepted theory of the origins of humanity, right? It's still widely accepted that we all come from Africans. And before anyone tries to say, yeah, we come from Africans, but not black Africans, hate to break it to you, but the Negro phenotype is the oldest phenotype on the planet, and pale skin is a fairly new evolutionary adaptation. And before you get to crying about Afrocentrism or whatever the fuck y'all be calling it these days, let's take a look at this article from science.org. How Europeans evolved white skin. Ancient DNA from skeletons shows dramatic natural selection on skin color and height in many Europeans. This was published April 2nd, 2015 by Ann Gibbons. Common European traits like pale skin evolved relatively recent in Central and Southern Europe. St. Louis, Missouri. Most of us think of Europe as the ancestral home of white people, but a new study shows that pale skin, as well as other traits such as tallness and the ability to digest milk as adults, arrived in most of the continent relatively recently. The work presented here last week at the 84th annual meeting of the American Association of Physical Anthropologists offers dramatic evidence of recent evolution in Europe and shows that most modern Europeans don't look much like those of 8,000 years ago. So, of course, this goes back to the whole Cheddar Man thing, how the Cheddar Man is the ancestor of modern European Britons. And you actually saw like his great, 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 great grandson times like a million, whatever. But you saw that they actually look alike, but his ancestor was black. It was a black passing man, with blue eyes, yeah, but he was a black man, dark skin, complexion. And his descendant looks very much like him, but he's a white man with blue eyes. It's very interesting. Now, what caused this evolutionary adaptation was a combination of different things, but let's get back to this article. When it comes to skin color, the team found a patchwork of evolution in different places and three separate genes that produce light skin, telling a complex story for how European skin evolved to be much lighter during the past 8,000 years. The modern humans who came out of Africa to originally settle Europe about 40,000 years are presumed to have had dark skin, which is advantageous in sunny latitudes. And the new data confirmed that about 8,500 years ago, early hunter gatherers in Spain and Hungary also had darker skin. Now, this is another article from the Tech Interactive. This one was October 7, 2009. I think I was still in middle school when this came out. So let's dig into this last part of the video. A curious adult from California asks, understand that lack of sunshine led to Caucasians becoming pale because of lack of vitamin D, but how did it happen? This is a great question that gets at how changes can happen in a species because of the environment. Pale skin was always there in European ancestors' genes. It just took a crisis to bring them out and make mostly everyone have light skin. People need the sun to make their own vitamin D. Nowadays, we can, although we don't always do, get enough of this vitamin from our multivitamins, fortified milk, etc., etc., etc. But thousands of years ago, we had to rely mostly on the sun for vitamin D, which wasn't a problem in Africa where we all started out. There's so much sunlight actually that getting enough vitamin D just wasn't a problem. The sun's harsh UV light was. Close to the equator, it's beneficial for a person to have darker skin because darker skin protects you from these harmful UV rays. But getting enough vitamin D was certainly a problem in Northern Europe. And I mean, you know this if you ever visited there. It's not a place where it's very sunny. The winter days are short and the cold weather causes people to cover a lot of their skin and stay indoors. And it's cloudy and awful a lot. It's so hard to get enough sun under these conditions that dark skin is actually a problem in these parts of the world, which is probably why Northern Europeans turn from dark to pale to get enough vitamin D. This is how evolutionary adaptations work. Your genes mutate so that the next generations can survive and go on. So this is the last part I'm going to cover because I don't want to take too long making this video. I want to make this short and as concise as possible. So let's get to this. Pale skin sweeps Europe. Imagine a group of Africans migrate to Northern Europe. This population has lots of different gene variations in terms of skin color. That means that there's a range of colors from dark to darker. Most of these folks have two dark variations of the SLC. We just gonna call it gene. They are DD genetically, but a few might also have DL. These DL people would tend to be on the lighter side of the skin color range, and the same will be true for many other genes involved in the skin color. Some of these folks will have lighter skin variations of these other genes. At some point after coming from Europe, or coming to Europe, forgive me, darker skinned people started getting sick. Since most of the people had dark skin, this means that most of the people were sick. This was not a good time to be European. Not only were they sick, but the darker skinned children were as well. The kids had weak bones and suffered many problems, including an awful disease called rickets. Most of these children didn't survive to have kids of their own, which is very interesting. A lot of people don't actually know that if you as a melanated person don't get enough vitamin D, you will get sick. We have like the opposite problem to, European people with paler skin. Like they get too much sun, they get sunburn, they get boils, they get all types of, skin cancers and stuff like that. We don't get enough sun, we get sick, we get depressed, we get rickets, etc. But remember though, there were a few people who had lighter skin. All right, people who had the DL genetically version of SLC gene. So they did better because they can get more vitamin D from the weak European sun. And some of the kids inherited these parents less or paler skin, and this was how Europeans came about. This is how things started to flourish for the European. So as you can clearly see, there's a lot of evidence that supports that Caucasians originated from Black Africans. There's a lot. I mean, all of this. This is common sense. This is common knowledge. I don't know what has gotten into modern people's heads that they come up with all types of like brand new theories. I just out of the crack of their ass, but this is how it always has been. This has always been accepted. It probably always will be accepted. All of the evidence point towards this. There's even a documentary out of Chinese scientists trying to figure out their origins, and they found out that they originate from Africans. Check this out.
However, there is something that could settle this debate of where the Chinese come from once and for all. To prove that the Chinese evolved independently from everyone else, from Homo erectus here in China.
Before the project started, I was hoping that I could identify or could be able to find evidence that support independent origin of Chinese in China, because I'm a Chinese and came from China, and through the education process, I always believed that there's something special about Chinese.
He singled out a male genetic marker which only appeared about 80,000 years ago in Africa. So any man who carries that marker must have recent African ancestors and can't be descended from the more ancient Asian Homo erectus. Jin took DNA from over 160 ethnic groups around East Asia. Over 12,000 samples. And so, what did you find?
We did not see even one single individual that could be considered as the descendant of the Homo erectus in China. Rather, everybody was a descendant of our ancestors from Africa.
And let's not forget how I brought the receipts that prove that the first Americans, the first indigenous Americans, originated from Australian Aboriginals. I got all the receipts. I'm going to link everything in the description. And before someone tries to get into the comments and say some stupid shit like Australian Aboriginals aren't black, yes, we are. And other Australian Aboriginals see themselves as black. You want some evidence? Check this out.
Aboriginal people think of African black people?
Oh, they love them.
Yeah?
Yes,
Tell them.
absolutely. We love the Africans up here.
Same color. Same color. I like that.
Real good.
Yeah?
Yeah. We love all the African people.
Yes?
Yeah. Same blood and same colors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. So when you see someone like me, are you what goes through your mind?
Countrymen, we're all the same.
We're all the same.
I feel like you're our brothers and sisters.
I like that. So,
So as you can see, this all comes back full circle. All of humanity started in Africa. Even Europeans were at one point dark-skinned people. Everyone were dark-skinned at one point in time. The further you go back in history, the darker the people get. And Australian Aboriginals are the ancestors of modern-day Native Americans. Native Americans might not come from Africans, but they do come from Negroid black people.